Morning, everyone. Apologies for the delay there. Just a few things. Our minister was held up for a couple of minutes there. Sorry about that. Okay, my name is David Walsh, and I'm the president of Dungarvan West Waterford Chamber of Commerce. The chamber here is been around now for 30 years this year, and our business basically is to create, support, maintain, and promote a positive environment for businesses in West Waterford. We have two sponsors today who helped us fund the background techie of this, and that's Totem and Airhouse. Both of whom are very active members in our chamber. So where are we at? In the midst of this unbelievable, horrendous pandemic, all the words that are out there, we're having to come to terms with. There's also another small issue for us to deal with, and that's Brexit. To say it has made the news a little bit in the last few days is probably an understatement. Majority of us disagreed, the vast majority of people in Ireland disagreed with the idea of Brexit to start with, but look, it's a reality, it's fast approaching, and we as small business people have to deal with the consequences more than most. We're all aware of the tense situation we find ourselves with, difficult negotiations ongoing, and we're honoured to have two extremely knowledgeable speakers with us here today on the subject. Our first speaker is our Minister, Simon Coveney, TD, Minister of Foreign Affairs and Defence. He's also the Deputy Leader of Fine Gael. He previously served as Taoiseach, Minister for Housing, Planning and Local Government, as well as Minister for Agriculture, Food and Marine. Simon was elected into the European Parliament in 2004 and was a member of the EPP group. In the past few days, actually yesterday I read a story, Simon Coveney has been awarded the prestigious annual European Business Press Award. It represents a significant recognition by Europe's business community of the work that's been done to date by both the Minister and his department. I suppose Mr. Coveney has been a very busy man on UK Airways over the weekend. But he has some big names on his side, including obviously former UK Prime Ministers John Major and Tony Blair also. We're blessed to have your time at this crazy time, and it is appreciated. I know your diary must be crazy these days. I'll now hand you over to Mr. Coveney to have a few words, and then we're going to bring Jim Power, Economist, into the group. Jim is going to bring some questions, observances of his own, plus some of the actual members of the chamber beyond. Okay, I'll pass you over to Mr. Coveney. Thank you.
Great. Can you hear me okay, David?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Great. Hi, Jim. How are you? Well, look, first of all, thanks for the opportunity to speak to you this morning. And I know I'm getting a reputation for every time people see me on a screen, they're only talking about one issue, and that's Brexit. But you know, for a number of months now, despite all of the challenges of COVID, and they are very significant challenges for all of us, you know, I've been trying to maintain a message that we are far from concluded in terms of the Brexit negotiations, and a failure to conclude successfully even a very basic, and I would regard a very thin, free trade agreement, which I think is the only thing possible at this stage. The absence of doing that will mean for Waterford, for the Southeast, and for the Irish economy generally, we will have a lot more disruption than we otherwise would have from the start of next year in terms of trade with the UK. So what we've seen in the last week or so is a significant increase in the media profile of the Brexit discussions and negotiations, because the British government has decided to take a much more aggressive approach towards trying to, we can only assume, force concessions out of the EU side. And that has ignited real tension, eroded trust to a certain extent, but has resulted in an awful lot more coverage of the issue itself. But maybe I could just take you through where we are, what we need to do, and why I'm still confident and reasonably optimistic that a deal is still possible, even though many commentators today and this week will be far more pessimistic in their outlook, as indeed are the markets, as we've seen sterling weaken significantly in recent days. So there are essentially three challenges from an Irish perspective that we need to overcome. And I'll talk about Britain's change in approach later on and explain why it complicates things significantly. But you know, from an Irish government's point of view, we need to focus on what we can do, who we can influence, and how we can prepare our own country for what's to come. The first is we need to contribute towards maximizing the chances of getting a future relationship in place over the next 2 months or so that can avoid Ireland slipping into a WTO-style trade approach with the UK, which is what will be the default position if we can't get a trade agreement between the EU and the UK. There has been 8 rounds of formal negotiation and another 4 or so informal meetings and discussions. To be honest with you, they've got nowhere. And that is essentially because, and you'll hear me unfortunately criticizing the British government's approach regularly this morning, but it's just the truth. The main reason why we've made no progress in relation to putting together the foundations that are necessary for a free trade agreement is that the UK government has simply moved away from what they committed to do in what's called the political declaration. So this time last year, there was 2 things agreed. There was a treaty, which was the withdrawal agreement, which was a legalistic, long document that effectively facilitated Britain leaving the European Union in a way that's structured, that created a transition period to give us all a bit of space and time to put a future relationship in place, that had the protocol on Ireland and Northern Ireland in it. And once that was signed and ratified, it becomes international law. The second thing that was signed, though, which was also very important, was a political declaration between the 2 sides, signed by Boris Johnson and his government. And that was essentially to set the rules of engagement, if you like, and the parameters within which we would agree a future trade agreement and a future relationship. And unfortunately, those parameters, and this happened back in March, the British government said, well, look, yes, we did sign that, but we're now moving away from those political commitments. The biggest one being on the need to establish a level playing field between the British economy and the EU economy, so that we could have fair competition on both sides of the Irish Sea and fair competition between the UK and mainland EU, if you want to call it that, which would then allow us to put a free trade agreement in place that wouldn't involve tariffs in particular, but also perhaps quotas on some products. In other words, both sides agreed that we cannot allow a situation where a future British government would deregulate their own economy to create a cost competitive advantage versus the EU single market, and then trade into that single market without tariffs. The EU could never allow that, can never allow that, and will never allow that. And the UK accepted that and signed up to it in the political declaration. Now the British government is saying that they aren't willing to agree anything on a level playing field. And in fact, the whole term level playing field has become toxic within the Westminster system, a little bit like the backstop was previously. But if you look at the political declaration, under section 14, the title of it is Level Playing Field for Open and Fair Competition. And then it goes into some detail in terms of what needs to be achieved there to make sure that we have a fair trading platform and between the EU and the UK to make sure that businesses in Waterford or anywhere else in the southeast aren't disadvantaged versus their counterparts in the UK operating in a similar market that doesn't have barriers to trade. So unfortunately, the pattern that we've seen in an even more brazen and explicit way from last weekend, where the British government is not only now saying that they don't agree with the approach to finalize a trade deal, they're now saying they're willing to break international law if they don't get what they want, to simply pass domestic legislation to override the withdrawal treaty. But that pattern had been in place long before last weekend on the level playing field, on fishing, on financial services, and a whole range of other things. There are 11 different negotiating streams that all require agreement over the medium term in different areas, from aviation to transport to data to financial services to judicial cooperation, as well as the need to put a basic trade deal in place. So basically what I'm saying is that the EU is pretty clear that what they would prefer is a very comprehensive agreement that involves all of these things. But what they're willing to live with is a basic free trade agreement. But in order for that to happen, to avoid tariffs and quotas, there's got to be some agreement on a level playing field, even though it won't be called that because of the politics of it now. There's got to be some agreement on fishing, because it was always agreed that fishing would be part of the overall trade negotiation and deal. And there has got to be a governance model, particularly now, given what the UK have done over the last 10 days. There's got to be a governance model that is seen as fair and independent, that can resolve disputes if they emerge after a deal is done, that can call out one side or the other if they're not following through on their commitments in that trade deal. And I think the EU is going to be even stronger on the need for that now, given the politics that's being played in Westminster today. So at the moment, the ingredients for a foundation stone, if you like, upon which to build a basic free trade deal are not there. That doesn't mean I don't believe it's possible to get that done. I think it is possible to get it done. And the very fact that negotiations are continuing this week in Brussels between David Frost and his team and Michel Barnier and his team on the task force, I think is an indication of that. Despite all of the distractions and the straw men that have been put out there by Number 10 over the last few days, that have really created an atmosphere of some tension. I still think the actual negotiators will still be focused on trying to find solutions to these core issues that will allow us to avoid the political failure of having to revert to WTO rules and regulations for trade at the end of this year. So that's the future relationship. There's only one more formal round of negotiations scheduled, but obviously that's going to change and there'll be a new schedule in place. I don't believe we'll get a deal until the end of October at the earliest, and I think you'll see a lot of politics and grandstanding and distractions between now and then. And regardless of how firm the Irish government has been in the last few days on calling out the British government for their threat to breach the treaty and international law and the legislation to do that, we will not lose sight of the more important prize here, which is to actually find a way of getting a deal despite all of the tensions and trust issues that are now a problem. The second issue is somewhat linked now, unfortunately, to the ability to get a future relationship and the trust around that, and that's the implementation of the Northern Ireland and Irish Protocol, which for some of the agri-food companies in the Waterford region and the southeast is very important. And so, as you've seen, despite the fact that the UK published a paper, which they entitled their command paper a couple of months ago, or 3 months ago, in terms of the implementation of the withdrawal agreement and the Northern Ireland Protocol, the British Prime Minister now seems to be saying, well, sorry, we can't have that, in terms of perceived trade barriers down the Irish Sea for goods travelling from GB into Northern Ireland. So, you know, they have taken a completely inconsistent approach on this issue, but I still believe, you know, speaking to people on the ground, that the British government are committed to implementing the protocol. They have three issues with it, which are the source of all of this tension in terms of the UK internal market bill. One is on state aid and how the state aid agreement in the protocol, which applies to Northern Ireland, where Northern Ireland has to essentially be consistent with state aid rules from the EU to avoid unfair competition on the island of Ireland, how that applies in terms of parent companies in the UK or in GB, whether or not the British government can provide them with state aid support beyond EU rules, and whether that then leaks into Northern Ireland and gives a competitive advantage. There's that issue. The second issue is around what's called goods at risk, goods coming from GB into Northern Ireland, and whether or not they are going to leak into the EU single market from Northern Ireland into the Republic of Ireland. And if so, who makes the determination as to what goods are goods at risk and which aren't, and therefore, if there are tariffs in the future, whether tariffs would apply to those goods. And the British government is saying that that has to be a British minister, which of course is totally contrary to the Northern Ireland Protocol, because it has to be agreed collectively by both sides. And then the third issue is a requirement for businesses in Northern Ireland to actually have export declarations before they send product to GB. And the British government again is saying that they're simply going to unilaterally make a decision that that's not going to happen. Which again is totally contrary to the Northern Ireland Protocol and the mechanisms to determine these issues and dispute resolution should that be necessary. So if you're asking me for my assessment, I think while there's a lot of distraction and tension at the moment on the implementation of the Northern Ireland Protocol, I think we can find ways around these issues in a way that is consistent with the protocol in a managed way. But certainly the British government's approach has made it much more difficult to do that because they've raised the hackles of sort of hardline unionism again in relation to the concerns that they would have had around a border down the Irish Sea and so on. And that is really, really irresponsible and unhelpful and also not accurate, quite frankly. Talk of, barricading Northern Ireland from the GB market in terms of food supply is just inflammatory language and does not represent any basis in fact. So that's the protocol, and we have a specialised committee and a joint committee to implement the protocol. Michael Gove is the sort of key person in the British government on that, and obviously he's a very important person for me to have a good relationship with, and I do. The third issue then from an Irish point of view is preparedness. So, and this is where I think the businesses that are on this call will want to hear, something positive from me. So we're going to put a budget together based on a very cautious approach to Brexit. We've just published last week. I mean, it got a bit sort of hidden in some ways. It's this document. If anybody hasn't read it, they should. It's 56 pages, and it talks about the preparations for the end of the transition period. It talks about two scenarios, one which I still think is marginally the most likely, which is to get a basic trade deal along with a level playing field agreement of sorts, along with a governance model to deal with disputes, along with a basic agreement on fishing. That package of four, I think, can allow us to get a trade deal that avoids tariffs and quotas, which is what we want. And then all of the other issues, which are also very important, particularly for the Southeast, around haulage out of Rosslare and so on. Haulage, the land bridge issues, medical devices issues, judicial cooperation, aviation, a long list of other issues. They will, I hope, be able to get temporary contingency arrangements in place while we have a longer medium-term negotiation into next year to put permanent solutions in place as part of a future relationship. But it's the cliff edge trade issues that we've got to solve and focus on for now. So we have a contingency that deals with that optimistic scenario, and then we're also unfortunately planning for a no deal scenario as well, which is going to involve significant supports for some vulnerable sectors, particularly agri-food, and within agri-food, beef and dairy. Because at the moment we sell €5.5 billion worth of food and drink to the UK every year. If we operate under normal WTO tariffs, the tariff would be annually somewhere between 1.35 billion and 1.5 billion euros a year on that trade. So if you're Glanbia, or if you're ABP, or if you're Dawn Meats, this is a big deal. And while the UK in the short term will have to continue to buy, in my view, from Ireland in order to make sure that they don't have empty shelves in their supermarket, we're going to see a significant increase in price of beef in the UK coming from Ireland because of tariffs. And in the medium term, that's a big problem because there'll be a constant downward pressure on price to compensate for that. And the UK over time will look for alternative sources of cheaper meat from other parts of the world, which they'll be able to get. So we really need to try to avoid that if we can. But if it happens, we of course will be supporting the agri-food sector and the food sector. It employs about 180,000 people if you take the whole food sector, from primary producers to processing and adding value. And that's a hugely important indigenous part of the Irish economy. And we will continue to support, as I think the EU will, the enforced change on that sector in terms of supply chains and new markets, should we have to do that over time come the 1st of January. But of course, you know, there are other messages as well in terms of whether there's a deal or no deal in this paper that we published. And that is essentially to every business that exports to, buys from, or transits through the UK, every one of you needs to plan for quite a significant change in market environment, whether that is planning for SBS checks and the delays that will come from that, whether it's customs declarations, whether it's deciding whether you can do a customs declaration internally on your own systems and train up people to do that in your company, or whether you want to take on a customs agent, whether your supply chains involve companies in the UK now that are no longer covered by EU certification. If that's where your market or final destination is, then you got to change supplier. Or whether you're a supermarket chain that is now bringing in large volumes of different batches of different foods that are processed and so on, can you do that efficiently with the SBS checks that will be required, or will you have to change your supply chains to some other market or from some other market in terms of sourcing? Like, these are practical considerations now that companies need to be thinking about. Some of the big multinationals have already done it. So the medical supplies business, medicines generally, because they've got to plan a year or 18 months in advance in terms of supplies, they've already factored in most cases, different outcomes on Brexit. But for SMEs in particular, and for medium-sized companies, these are things that, while we've been scared by a no-deal Brexit on 3 occasions in the past, and we've marched the country up to the top of a hill and back down again each time, this time it is for real. There is no extra time now. There's not going to be an extra 6 months added on or an extra 12 months added on. Legally, the transition period ends at the end of this year and can't be extended. And therefore, we're either going to have a basic deal, but even with that basic deal, there's a lot of disruption and a change to the trading environment, or we're going to have a very disruptive no deal, which again, people need to be thinking about in terms of how your business could or would respond to that scenario. So look, there's a whole range of other linked things that I could talk about, but maybe I'll ask Jim interrogate me on things like the land bridge, whether we can rely on that in the future, or whether we should be looking at direct shipping routes now, what we're doing in terms of supports to help businesses make that change. I mean, there's essentially a €9,000 grant for any company that wants to take on either a customs agent or wants to upskill their own staff to be able to do that stuff online themselves. Very easy to apply for. And under Board BIA, there's also in the food sector a range of supports that are available, and through Enterprise Ireland, through local LEO offices, there's also a range of low-cost loans and also other forms of grant aid to help businesses make the changes and the adaptations that they need to be able to prepare for this new reality, which all of us regret, but is going to happen whether we like it or not from the 1st of January next year. So look, can I sum up by saying you're going to hear a lot of politicians talking negatively in the days ahead about the tactics and the approach of the British government, and you're going to get a lot of fire back from London as well towards the EU. What I would say is we need to keep our head through all of this process while calling out inappropriate behaviour, but not lose sight of the real prize here, which is finding a way in very difficult circumstances that have been made more difficult by the actions of the British government in the last 10 days, but finding a way of getting a deal done here that's good for both sides. Because, like, make no mistake about it, Ireland wants and needs a prosperous, strong British economy. We benefit from that. And anybody who thinks that we can kind of get one over on Britain here by taking a hardline position or encouraging the EU to do that, I think is misrepresenting what Ireland's interests are. We want a good and positive political relationship with the UK, and we want the minimum barriers to trade between these two islands. And that is what we'll continue to try to pursue as these negotiations reach a climax in the coming weeks. And, you know, we will be as prepared as we possibly can be. That's all I can say as a country for whatever scenario unfolds. And unfortunately, we will be designing a budget again that is preparing for a no-deal Brexit, because we have to be cautious in that regard. And therefore, that has consequences and choices that mean tough decisions, I'm afraid, but necessary decisions to make sure that we will be able to be in a position financially to support the businesses that are that will be strained, to put it mildly, should we have no deal by the end of the year. So look, David, thanks. I know you have some questions in relation to Waterford in particular, and the Southeast generally. I'm happy to answer them in relation to the North Quays project, or in relation to the university status, or indeed the airport, or whatever you want to ask, and I'll try and give you straight answers if I can. But just on the broader Brexit issues, it's along with COVID, these are the two big challenges now, I think, for the country and the government. And it'll shape the budget, it'll shape our economic recovery plan, and of course it'll shape our relationship with the British government for the weeks and months ahead. So thanks for the opportunity.
No, appreciate your time. Thanks for that. I'd like Jim to come in on that. Everyone probably knows Jim is a good friend of the Dungarvan West Waterford Chamber, with roots not too far from ourselves. A proud Waterford man, and I've heard him speak around the country and has referred to us plenty of times. Jim has a wealth of experience, everyone knows, in delivering insightful economic analysis, forecasts and commentary to both Irish and international audiences. So, Jim, look, I'll hand it over to you. You've got a lot of questions and comments, I think.
Thank you very much, David. It's been called being too parochial. That's my problem, I think. But anyway, Mr. Coveney, thank you very much for a fantastic elucidation of the key issues. I suppose before I say a few words and ask you some questions, I'd just like to, number one, congratulate you on the European Business Press Award you got last Friday. Another great recognition at European level for Ireland, so well done on that. And secondly, didn't see it yesterday morning, but I saw it last night. Your interview with Andrew Marr yesterday morning, you did Ireland proud, flew the flag very proudly for us. So I think very well done on that. So congratulations. We live, as you know, in an extremely strange world. You know, in the last 6 months, we've seen total disruption from COVID-19. And in many ways, it kind of put Brexit on the back burner. But thankfully, there were those in government like Mr. Coveney who kept the eye focused on what was happening on the Brexit front, because regardless of COVID, Brexit had not gone away. But there is, I think, at a more global level, a lot of worrying things going on for a very small, very open economy like Ireland, where globalization has been a key driver of our prosperity in recent years. But when you look at the war, and I use the word guardedly, going on between Trump in the United States and the European Union, and then you see over the last week particularly, it has really been highlighted, the war going on between Boris Johnson and the European Union. And I mean, Johnson, following the bill that went into Parliament last week, said that one of the motivations was to preserve the integrity of the United Kingdom, supposedly from a future attack from the European Union. I mean, that's extraordinary stuff that you'd normally hear thrown at countries like North Korea or rogue states. So I think it's really disturbing to see, at a time when we face an enormous economic and political threat from China, from Russia, that the Western world is fragmenting like this. And, you know, I would fear that we're moving from the great integration that has driven the last 40, 50 years towards a much greater level of fragmentation. And I think everything we see out of the United Kingdom at the moment sort of, well, not everything, but a lot of it feeds into that narrative. And, you know, it is concerning that I think somebody like Dominic Cummings, who clearly has inordinate influence over the Prime Minister, he sees himself as a disruptor. And, you know, unfortunately, I think that's driving a lot of the agenda in the background. But it's also interesting to see some of the comments that have come out of people in the UK over the last few days in relation to the Internal Markets Bill. Theresa Villiers saying that it's not acceptable for the EU to run down the clock strikes me as absolutely bizarre, given that the UK, rather than the EU, is running down the clock. But then we saw this morning Geoffrey Cox, the former Attorney General, saying that we signed up, we knew what we were doing, and the crossing of an important boundary is when a government says it will break the law and an international treaty it has signed. So it's bizarre stuff. And I was reassured to hear the Minister talk about the importance of maintaining a very important relationship with the United Kingdom going forward. I saw another economist write in the last couple of weeks, and I won't mention his name, I'll be accused of being a bitch, pardon the language if I do, but he was sort of looking at the headline trade statistics between Ireland and the UK and basically saying we need to get over ourselves, forget about the UK, there's a much bigger world out there to focus on. But the reality, of course, is that the headline statistics hide the fact that there are certain parts of the economy that are seriously still exposed to the United Kingdom, and always will be, because the biggest driver of trade is geography. So there is a good reason why the UK is such an important trading partner for Ireland in areas like agri-food, which is so important for the Southeast, also for tourism, but indeed for indigenous SMEs in Ireland who export. The UK is and always has been the easiest market to break into. So I think we need to be very, very mindful of that. Minister, can I just ask you a little bit about the impact of the US perspective on this? I mean, we have Trump and his attitude towards the European Union, but then we have somebody like Nancy Pelosi coming out again in recent days saying that Congress would not allow a trade deal between the United States and the United Kingdom if the UK reneged or backed away from the withdrawal agreement. How important do you think that US perspective is at this juncture, guiding where we're likely to go over the coming months?
Yeah, I mean, just before answering that question, can I just very much back up what you've said on the importance of the UK for the Irish economy? I mean, this idea, because our percentage of exports has been dropping to the UK versus other parts of the EU and other parts of the world. And therefore, we need to just move away from the UK anyway, that they're not a trusted partner. There's a big world out there that Ireland can compete and win in. I mean, I'm all for expanding other markets, but, you know, revenue commissioners are writing to 90,000 companies as we speak because they all trade with the UK. So, like, in some ways, our export figures are somewhat distorted by big multinationals that are exporting hugely valuable product, and in some cases, big volumes of product to other parts of the world, whether it's transatlantic, and also, you know, when you take into account services as well as goods. So if you're an SME in Ireland, the UK market is hugely important. It's close in terms of proximity. It's one of the highest paying markets in the world for an awful lot of the products that we sell. And of course, it's a market that we understand because their legal system is similar to ours, their market is very similar to ours, their consumers behave in a way that's very similar to ours. And so it's a much easier market to break into and expand in. So the idea that we just sort of bypass our closest neighbor of, you know, over 60 million people in a hugely wealthy society and economy, in my view, is nonsense. We need to try to protect and maintain our integration with the British market as best we can, despite Brexit. And I think that's what gives the maximum opportunity for our companies in terms of growth and expansion, while obviously looking at market diversion to other parts of the world as well, where appropriate. But on the US, I think this is a very sensitive issue for the British government. They don't like it when Nancy Pelosi or Richie Neal or Brendan Boyle or the chief advisor to Biden speaks out and says there won't be a trade deal between the US and the UK if the UK deliberately undermine the Good Friday Agreement. Nobody should underestimate the emotional connection that Irish America has with that agreement. They see it as their agreement as well as ours, and that the US has some ownership of it because of their involvement at the time, which was very fundamental through a number of very prominent US politicians. You know, regardless of whether President Trump wins the election or whether Joe Biden wins the election in November, a trade deal between the US and the EU, should it be negotiated and agreed, and I think that's going to take quite some time, by the way, these things aren't done quickly. If it's agreed, certainly for the foreseeable future, the Democrats are going to have a majority in Congress, and no trade deal can come into force without Congress passing it or ratifying it. So Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats are hugely influential, and they have been very direct and very clear that if, as they call it, the Good Friday Accords are undermined, there will not be a ratification of a trade deal, even if the president wants it. And I think that is a very strong message to the British government that, look, this isn't just about Britain and British politics. There are others that are being impacted by Brexit as well. And the British government needs to take that into account, in particular, Ireland and Northern Ireland, and the fragility of politics and relationships there. So yeah, I mean, we have some powerful friends, I'm glad to say, on this issue, but we also have right on our side, you know, which helps in politics, actually, you know. Yeah. And what we're getting, unfortunately, from Number 10 right now is spin and a twisting of the truth that's highly emotive, and as I say, creates sort of straw men to knock down, to perhaps make the Prime Minister look good or something. I'm not quite sure what the tactic is, but it's very aggressive, and that's why the response hasn't just come from Brussels and Dublin and other EU capitals. It's come from Washington and other parts of the world as well.
Okay, thank you. There's a very specific technical question here, which has come from across the water in Dungarvan, if I describe it that way, over in Ring. Will there be implications for temporary services in Britain, like supplying outside broadcast unit to broadcasters on an occasional basis? And I suppose this ties into the whole, we tend to talk more about the disruption to the flow of goods between Ireland and the UK, but services like outside broadcast units and so on, what do you think the implications will be there?
Yeah, first of all, I should have mentioned Dungarvan earlier, by the way, one of my favourite towns in Ireland, because I mentioned Waterford City, obviously. Look, you know, the truth is that if we get a trade deal, it's going to be a trade deal for goods, primarily. Services are in a different category, and while there, of course, needs to be agreement around services and the continuing maintenance of services, whether it's financial services in the insurance industry or whatever. And we are doing some of that in relation to the legislation that we're planning to pass in the coming weeks, which is a new Brexit omnibus piece of legislation that tries to nail down as much as we can nail down domestically, both with the UK and ourselves. But more broadly on services, I think the challenge is going to be around some of the linked areas. So data, for example, you know, if we don't have an agreement on data security and how that is managed between a third country, which is Britain, and the EU, then I think that is going to result in some very complicated problems for companies to resolve. So if you're an insurance broker in the UK providing, or sorry, if you're a financial services company in the UK providing a service to Irish companies here, and you're keeping their data, you're essentially holding on to EU consumers' data, which may become an issue unless there's an agreement to resolve that. Likewise, in relation to certification and qualifications, if you're providing a certain service, if that service requires EU certification to provide it into EU consumers, i.e. in Ireland, if that EU certification no longer applies to the British market, all of a sudden that product is no longer viable here. Likewise, in relation to online services and in fact online trade, if you're importing product at the moment, like animal feed or something like that, you can import without any complications at all because it's essentially the same market, unless you've got live animals, which is a different issue. All of a sudden now there's going to be SBS checks required. There may be duty required. So these environments that we've taken for granted because we've all benefited from this fantastic single market that we've created and that Britain has been central to ensuring works, ironically enough, is simply no longer going to apply. Now, having said that, there will be sectoral agreements, and we've done quite a lot with the UK, for example, around recognition of qualifications, but it'll essentially be the sectoral bodies and societies that recognize those qualifications will have to agree that with each other. But in terms of the broadcasting issues, I mean, I'd need to check that for them. But if people want to email me with specific questions like that within certain sectors,
yeah,
please do that, and I'll get back to them pretty quickly on it.
Okay, thank you very much. Looking at the sort of regional impact of Brexit, it's clear that the Southeast is a region that could be seriously damaged by Brexit because of the importance of the agri-food sector, because of the importance of tourism, and we don't have the sort of huge multinational base like the Southwest, where the chemical and pharma sector is just such an important anchor for the local economy in the Southwest. But you probably know from being in government in recent years that there is a sort of a view in the Southeast that in many ways we've been left behind, and Waterford particularly, and in terms of economic development and so on, we haven't done particularly well. And I think for people, stakeholders in the Southeast, particularly in Waterford, 4 issues are deemed as essential to the future development. One is the university. Secondly, the development of the North Quays in the city. Thirdly, the development of the airport to provide a sort of a regional air access hub. And I suppose the fourth issue is the cath lab and the 24/7 coronary care in Waterford's University Hospital. I suppose 3 of those are very economic, the fourth one a health issue. But could you give us your perspective on where those issues are at the moment and where you and government see those developing?
Yeah, God,
an easy question.
You're beginning to sound like a lobbyist there, Jim.
No.
No, look, I mean, first of all, I don't buy into this view that the Southeast has been left behind. If you look at the investment in roads, for example, in the Southeast, it's quite significant. If you look at the plans for Ireland 2040 and the National Planning Framework, hugely ambitious for Waterford City in particular, as a driver for the Southeast region. If you look at what the government have been trying to do to create a university in Waterford, linking capacity with Carlow, we've been trying to push that for years, but for all sorts of more localized political reasons, that hasn't happened. And only recently we have, we've appointed somebody new to try to bring people together to get an agreed outcome, like has been achieved between CIT in Cork and NIT Tralee, for example, to create a technological university for the Southwest, or sorry, for the Munster Technological University, which is what it's going to be called. So, I can assure you, because I've been sitting around the cabinet table for nearly a decade now. You know, we want to see the Southeast thriving. It is, from an agricultural point of view, arguably the best land in the country. It is, from an access point of view, the road connectivity with Dublin is very strong now. It's got an international port in Rosslare, which potentially will have opportunities for growth, ironically linked to Brexit, in terms of direct connection with the rest of the single market, and of course with the UK. So, you know, we want the technological university for the Southeast to happen yesterday, and we want to then back that up with funding in terms of campus development, supporting R&D. You know, Waterford does need a university. You know, and I like, no one's arguing that. But I think, you know, and this isn't a criticism of the people involved, because I know some of the issues are difficult and complex and have been divisive. But it certainly isn't a national government that's frustrating a university for the Southeast. We are actually, you know, we want to see it happen, and we want to actually then invest in it significantly to ensure that it's on a par with other universities in other parts of the country. In terms of the North Keys, you know, this is something that Senator John Cummings constantly talks to me about and is pushing. You know, I have to say that, like, I've been down, I've walked the North Keys, I've seen the project. I was the minister actually in the Department of Housing and Planning when we signed off on the first draft of the 2040 plan, which involved an ambition for Waterford City to grow its population by 50% over the next 20 years, and the need to invest significantly in infrastructure to make that happen. And so for the North Keys to happen, the state does need to invest significantly in bridge infrastructure and in key infrastructure. And my understanding is we are committed to doing that. And we have an urban development fund of 2 billion euros, which has already committed some money to Waterford to move this project forward, and will continue to do that. Certainly, I've sensed no reticence or pullback within government on the ambition for Waterford of that project, and I know it's a catalyst for a lot of other things as well.
Yeah.
On the airport, you know, the last government did make a decision to invest in the runway, despite the fact that there were no commercial airlines landing in Waterford Airport. We've got to change that. Now, look, we are living through extraordinary times for aviation anywhere. You know, Cork Airport at the moment is quite simply doesn't know where it's going to be this time next year. Yeah. Whether they should be planning for 400,000 passengers or 2 million passengers. We just, it's very, very hard to know. Hopefully tomorrow we will give a little bit more clarity, in fact, a lot more clarity on how Ireland is going to deal with international connectivity and travel, which I think is really important, not just for Dublin, but also for all parts of Ireland, to ensure that Ireland's international connectivity is somewhat protected, while of course we take the responsible decisions in terms of public health advice as well linked to international travel. But, you know, I'm not happy with where we've been on that issue for the last number of weeks. And I think you'll see tomorrow an awful lot more certainty in terms of the metric that decides what countries are on a green list, what countries are on an orange list, if you like, which will require some caution and some restriction, and what countries are on effectively a red list. Okay. That actually should be within in a tighter way. In terms of the cath lab, look, you know, this is something that's been going on for far too long. And the government has always said this shouldn't be a political decision, this should be a medical one. The financial resources are not the issue here. You know, we have invested in increasing the capacity of the cath lab in Waterford University Hospital, and will continue to do so. I'm very aware of the issue. But in terms of the economic drivers, you know, the university, the North Keys, the airport, they're all very much on the government radar. And if you look at the success, for example, of the relatively modest investment of the Greenway between Dungarvan and Waterford City, and the phenomenal success that it's been this summer. I remember I opened that. I remember cycling it with Paddy Coffee, and you know, that was by state standards a relatively modest investment, but they're the kind of investments that we need to be making to make sure that we're driving quality of life, which will attract investment into Waterford and the southeast, which is a very attractive place to live and work.
Okay, Minister. Yeah, okay.
The pressure for time. Should we be wrapping this up?
I realise, Minister, you have to get to Dublin, so we've gone about 5 minutes over time. Before I hand back to David, I'd just like to thank you very much for your excellent contribution this morning. You didn't shirk any of the issues. My only, I suppose, regret is that we don't have another hour. But anyway, that was great. I'd just like to wish you the real best of luck over the next few weeks, particularly up to the end of October, which will be crucial. So thank you very much for your efforts this morning and your ongoing efforts for Ireland in this Brexit battle. So I'll hand back to David. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jim. And I'd mirror those comments. I'm conscious that we're all busy people, especially the Minister. I hope everybody has learned something from what we've actually had today. Delighted with the speakers. Obviously, the story is going to change on a daily basis. We just have to keep our eyes on it and best to look again. Dungarvan West Waterford Chamber, like to express our sincere thanks to Simon Coveney, Minister for Foreign Affairs and Defence, and to Jim Power, Economist, for taking their time from their busy schedules to come with us here today. I suppose financially this was made possible by our two co-sponsors, Oran Little and Colin Byrne of Totem, and Stephen Walsh of Airhouse. Totem empowers brands. If you look up Totem's website, an excellent company, empowers brands to find and live their meaning and have an impressive portfolio of happy clients that we all heard and know of. Airhouse are at the forefront of ventilation technology and provide high quality ventilation and heat recovery solutions in the domestic and light commercial market in Ireland. Look, I appreciate it again. Thank you all for your time, and hopefully we can repeat a session similar in somewhere like the Park Hotel, or maybe even a new hotel in Dungarvan at some time.
Hope so.
Thank you very much.
David, thanks very much, and to everybody who's on the call. You know, I think we're living through an extraordinary period in history that will be talked about in 20 and 50 years' time. I think people will remember 2020 for enormous disruption, from, you know, a general election that didn't produce a government for 140 days to COVID coming out of left field, which has just been incredibly tragic as well as disruptive for business and for families, to Brexit really biting actually for the first time, because the transition period really disguises the decision that is Brexit until the end of this year. And so, you know, this is a time where we need to be listening to each other. And what I would say to you is that if we're missing something in government, like, let us know, particularly on the Brexit side. Contact me directly. If you have specific questions, and I know we had one of them in relation to broadcasting earlier, you know, do make contact with either my office or a local Leo office or Enterprise Ireland, and we'll get detailed answers for you. Unfortunately, we can't have the sort of big Brexit seminars like we had this time last year, where hundreds of people can actually talk and mingle and tease out issues and problems. But hopefully you got some clarity in terms of the issues that we need to resolve in the coming weeks. But, you know, prepare for the worst, and hopefully politicians will be able to deliver something better. But please don't let yourself be exposed when you could have actually acted to protect your business by doing it in the next you know, in the next couple of months before the end of the year. There's a lot of support and a lot of advice available free of charge for businesses that actually look for it. You know, as I say, I'm more optimistic than others. I think we will get a deal, but you'd be a very foolish business person not to plan for both scenarios. So thanks very much, and look forward to talking to you in the future, hopefully.
Thank you. Bye now.
Thank you very much.